Welcome to the New Level Podcast, everyone. My name is Phil, and I'm your host on today's show. And on today's episode, we speak with Rija Raharinosy, who's the Vice President, Sales and Alliances at Solulan, a Microsoft Gold partner based out of Toronto and Montreal. Rija comes with 20 plus years of experience in the IT space and 6 plus years of experience in the Microsoft space. And on today's episode, we speak about the top reasons for moving your organizations to the cloud, bring some interesting points about security. We're also going to discuss the difference between cloud solutions, hybrid cloud solutions, and multi-cloud solutions, and also discussing sort of technology trends and how they're going to shape our future. So lots to learn on today's episode, guys. Without further delay, I bring you Rija Raharinosy.
You are listening to the New Level Podcast, where humans talk about automation. We bring you industry experts and share new ideas that help elevate your business. Join your hosts, Philip Agib and Teresa Foreman, on the journey of automation technology.
So let's jump right into it. Rija, thank you so much for joining us on the New Level Podcast. My name is Phil. I'm the host here on the show, and I'm joined here by my amazing co-host, Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa Foreman. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Alcart Communications and Phil's partner. I'm super excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me, both of you. It's a pleasure to be able to be on this show with you both.
Amazing, Rija. Thank you so much. So let's jump right into it. This is probably the most hot topic that exists. Is the whole discussion around cloud, and we're going to jump right into it with our first question here. And really, we want you as an expert. Rija comes with 20 plus years of expertise in the IT space, and currently working as the VP Sales and Alliances at Solulan, which is a Microsoft Gold partner based out of Toronto and Montreal. And so we wanted to have you speak to our audience about, what are the top 5 reasons for a company to make the move to the cloud? Can you talk to us a little bit about that, Rija?
Yes, it'll be my pleasure. I'd say really is what we've seen the past past 5 to 10 years really is, there's really a lot of reasons why companies would want to move to the cloud. I'd say that if I were to, the top 5 for you, Phil, is the ones that I see are the most recurring really comes down to, first of all, to scale, because one of the reasons that the cloud allows an organization to be so efficient is it allows them to scale up or scale down. If there's a pandemic happening, you don't need to spend amount of monies or resources actually for all of your employees. Maybe some employees are being furloughed or some employees are being put on a break. The cloud allows you to actually scale down for that. So that is, I would say, one of the reasons why most people like to go in the cloud. The second reason really is the safety of data. As you know, when you go to the cloud, you leverage a data center, and that data center actually is managed by a provider, like a cloud provider. Could be Google, could be AWS, could be Microsoft. And these guys spend an enormous amount of time to basically go through all kinds of audits for security reasons, all kinds of certifications that they have to meet in order to actually safeguard your data. So it's going to be much more reassuring for someone to know that their data is safe into a bunker or a data center run by these guys, as opposed to someone, your IT guy who might actually run that into a server room at in the end of the hallway. You know what I mean? So safety of data is certainly one of the reasons why you would want to move to the cloud. And then after that, some practical reasons which are really, really important these days are like updates. Third reason is updates. As you know this, you've been working in this space for a while. The systems that we use and that we deploy for our customers require all kinds of updates, and those updates actually are critical. They actually happen automatically. You don't need to pay someone to run the updates. They run on their own, and they are being pushed down directly to the endpoints. And in the cloud, you don't need to actually worry and waste energy and time to run those updates. So that is, I would say, one of the top reasons as well. And then obviously, when you talk to an operational or a finance person, they do like the cloud because there's no requirement for capex. Capital expenses are actually not in play here, because it's a low operational expense that is that they have to take care of, and they like to pay for only what they're using. And then finally, one of the reasons why we're so successful in the cloud is because cloud promotes collaboration. With the cloud, your team can access, edit documents, applications, themselves, and everybody works on the same repository of data, and it works really well.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, that collaboration reason there, because us at Vantry, we're constantly collaborating. I mean, our number one resource is ourselves. It's our team. I mean, we spend hours collaborating between project managers, between the EDI analysts, between the developers, and with the customers and other partners as well. And just for collaboration reasons, I think making a move like this is worth it. And I mean, the other points that you mentioned, the scalability, I didn't even think about the idea of scaling down. Obviously we're always thinking about scaling up, but you're completely right. Scaling down is so much easier when you almost have control over the dial. You can dial it up, you can dial it down. It's completely up to you, and it's always at your fingertips. And the one that I really, really like the most is the updates. I can't tell you how much time and effort it takes to update software when it's stored locally. So for me, I mean, this, Rija, you guys helped us move to the to SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. We can't thank you enough for that. That has helped us tremendously going through this pandemic, and it will in the future for sure.
To your point, Phil, I think that, that's something some IT professionals, but particularly a lot of non-IT professionals, don't think about, is that scalability in the operational expenses. Because when you're buying hardware, the cost of that storage depends on what tier, right, of data. And so sometimes you're putting out so much money for hardware that's not being used, or it's stuff that you've archived, that you still have to keep it. And it's so expensive to buy the hardware. When when you've moved to the cloud, you can optimize your utilization of your storage so much better, and you can scale up, scale down, particularly, let's say you have a seasonal business and you need, this much capacity part of the year and less capacity another part of the year. When you're buying the hardware and investing in infrastructure, that's a sunk cost, right? Versus you can really optimize your CapEx, your OpEx when you're doing things virtually like that.
I would say you're right. And in the context of a pandemic like the one we are in here, where there's so many people who are being furloughed, it actually makes sense. It makes sense because it really
exactly. I mean,
on
sad but true, right? Yeah. I mean, some workforces are cut in half, cut by 80%. And all of a sudden, where do you start to realize some of those cost savings at a time when maybe your business is shut down or operating at far less capacity? So those, every dollar counts, and particularly in a time like this.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's some people say there's nothing more important than the cost, and it'd be interesting for people to see what the differences are. And I'm sure Rija, if anyone's interested, they could reach out to you and you can help them with that analysis. But let's move to the next question, because from what I understand, there are different types of cloud solutions. I've come across different options in the past, evaluating different systems for our company. And I know some of our audience, they're wondering the same thing. So maybe you can tell us the difference between a full cloud solution, hybrid cloud solution, and a multi-cloud solution, Rija.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So let's back to the basics. Cloud computing, where it really is the cloud. So most people will understand the cloud to be basically this model of buying computer resources. So your resources, basically your servers, your networks, the applications, which these days we use the term apps, all of those are basically hosted somewhere into somebody else's data center. Okay, so most of those big investments are now centralized into someone's data center, which really are put at your disposal. And you don't need to buy the entirety of the servers, the network, and all that, because all of that is being centralized and being managed on your behalf by this, what we call this cloud service provider. So that is the overall cloud model. When we talk about multi-cloud, and I will go into the hybrid cloud in a minute. When you talk about multi-cloud, that is a situation in which you may have a solution that basically leverages multiple cloud computing or storage services, but you're using one single access or one single instance or network instance to access those resources. Okay, so for example, in my own organization, we do a lot of cloud because we're a Microsoft cloud partner. So we do provide them all of the Microsoft workloads that you've been mentioning, like Teams, SharePoint, and all that. However, we do have another cloud that we leverage for backing up our customers' data. So when we back up our customers' data, typically we leverage, because most customers would want their data to be backed up into a data center that is in Canada because of the importance of having the data in country. In our case, we typically provide a multi-cloud environment or solution for backup and disaster recovery. So we're not necessarily leveraging the Microsoft cloud. We're leveraging another cloud, which is in this case the Datto cloud. Datto is our partner when it comes to backup, but it is a multi-cloud environment because as much as the data resides within Microsoft, we actually back it up into another cloud, which is the Datto cloud, also a service that we provide. So that is what we call a multi-cloud situation. And then when it comes down to hybrid, a lot of situations could arise when you need, for instance, an application that would require for you to actually have some applications on premise. You basically, both the applications in the cloud and the application on premise need to work together. And other people actually do have that, for instance, for all of their email server, because they do want to have control about what's happening on the way the email architecture works. So you will find more often than not some people wanting to have a hybrid architecture as opposed to full cloud. They would want hybrid architecture when there is a portion, typically like more the monitoring and control, actually being set up on premise. So that's where you basically refer to where those assets are being distributed. That's when you refer to cloud, full cloud, or hybrid scenarios.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, no, I'm glad you cleared that up. One of the things I can think of is like you said, is wanting to have something on site, but only one specific application, one specific project that you might be working on, and then maybe having the rest of it in the cloud. I feel like having that ability to choose is important, and I think that it gives the people control over their data. It gives people control over how they want to operate. And I think as long as people know that they do have the option, obviously there's pros and cons to storing and maintaining and managing all of that on site. As long as people know, as long as people understand, and as long as people are aware of everything that has to do with having this on site versus having it in the cloud, I think that's a great model. I think that's a question. If I was an IT director and I was thinking about moving into the cloud, I would definitely consider something like that, like a hybrid cloud where I can still maintain control over the things that I'm used to, things that are important, like you said, like the emails, but have that ability to maybe scale something a little bit quicker by relying on cloud providers like you said, like AWS, Microsoft, and Google, et cetera.
Google. Yeah. Rija, do you find when you're brought in on an engagement, that typically those strategic decisions, like whether they're having an on-premise infrastructure, or whether they've moved to the cloud, or whether they're looking in a lot of cases at a hybrid, and in particular around those multi-cloud environments, are you guys typically engaged once those decisions have been made, or are you coming in and saying, look, it makes sense in this environment to move to a hybrid model, or listen, you're putting all your stuff into one provider. Here's the strategic, thinking behind why you should look at a multi-cloud environment. What part of the decision-making process are you guys typically brought in at?
Well, it's a great question, Teresa. I would say it depends on what kind of mandate or what kind of scope are we talking about. If we're talking about something as strategic as voice, for instance, what I mean by voice is telephony. You just mentioned the example of Ventry that we just deployed. In the case of Ventry, we do have one location. Most people wanted to be able to work from home. It was not a big deal, but there's a lot of organizations who are not like that. A lot of organizations have their manufacturing facilities. They have their 1, 2, 3, tens of dozens of different locations where they have could be a finance center, could be whatever, and they actually need to have specific equipment in those locations because, for instance, they may have a call center or they may have specific. So in those situations, typically what we do is we come up as a trusted advisor, where we come up with, in the high level strategic setup or design of the solution, we would come up and say, listen, in the way you're actually set up today, we would recommend having this hybrid environment because of the way you're set up. So we come more as a strategic, in charge of the design of the solution. In some other mandates, it's going to defer because the solution, the customer has already made its mind, made up his mind in how he wants to operate. It's more of an execution type of setup that we're actually in charge of doing, which we're fine as well. But typically, it's always better for us. It always helps us help the customer better when we come more on a high level strategic level as opposed to more on an execution. Because the problem is, once you execute something, you don't really have much of a say on how. You're just doing it. You're just deploying it, as opposed to you're not designing it. So we find it a little more easier to actually add value when we are also designing the entire architecture for a solution for a customer.
It's also easier to control the output a bit better, right? When you've been in that consultative role. I mean, let's call it what it is. If service providers, and we're all to some degree service providers here, we're being held accountable for results. And when you're handed the roadmap, you kind of have to hope it works. Right. But when you have an active, role in defining that roadmap, then you have more accountability also, but also more comfort that you're going to drive the results, to your point, that you want to deliver for your customers. I want to touch on a little deeper on something that we just sort of referenced earlier when we were talking about, moving to the cloud, allowing you to scale your capacity up and down and, potentially just optimize usage and whatnot. Business flexibility is really important in general, right? Particularly during the pandemic, for all the reasons we referenced earlier, which is touching everybody, both personally and professionally. So when an organization, no matter how big or small, is thinking of moving to the cloud, what are some of those, if you're going in as, that in that consultative trusted advisor role, what are some of those business metrics that you would recommend that are concretely, tracked and ideally improved, that are going to support that level of flexibility that people are looking for?
Great question, Teresa. I would say in our business, we don't have actual metrics per se. But there's probably 3 different layers that I would always engage the customer with prior to actually a move to the cloud. The first one is, because you're untrusting the cloud service provider with your data, we really need to sit down and discuss about what happens in case of a disaster. Okay. In case of a disaster, in case of a fire in your server room, in case of a ransomware, a crypto locker, God knows how many disasters these days are actually possible, and specifically around small and medium-sized businesses, they're being literally hammered these days. Have you thought about how do you continue running your business if a disaster were to strike? So business continuity in case of disaster is something that we always have to discuss with the customer, because the cloud is great, but at the end of the day, it's all about getting my data, having access to my data, which is really my life. It's my data. If I lose my invoices, I don't get revenue. If I lose my intellectual property, it's problematic. So how do I make sure that in case something happens, I do have access to my data? So that is really, really important. The second piece I would say is everything around high availability. When you move to the cloud, it's great. However, you need to make sure that in the architecture that you are putting together, you do have access to that data quickly. It comes down to how do I minimize downtime? How do I ensure that in case I got hacked, I got a disaster, there's a fire or anything, once it's taken care of, how do I get back on business? How do I operate my business? So high availability of data is really, really, really key. And then finally, at the end of the day, comes down to understanding how much is all of this going to cost me? Because this is great, I can access my data, but how much do I actually make sure that I can pay for all this? What's the return on investment that typically I would be able to have in case of a disaster with all the insurance that we'll be paying for? What is it? How do I measure that ROI? And we do have tools that will allow, or metrics that will allow customers to really see that it's not that expensive. And that is why scalability is so key, because it is in this day and age, it actually is not going to cost you that much money to have a secure, safeguarded environment in the cloud.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally hear what you're saying. One of, you touched on risk and stuff like that, and I want to dig deep a little bit there. I've been working with software companies and SaaS organizations, companies in the IT space for about 20 years now. And one thing, particularly over the last 5 years in particular, what I see is a lot of anxiety around the infrastructure, the data management infrastructure, because to your point, our data is our life, right? And in our personal and in particular business lives, data, your customers' data is their life, and you're being charged with your customers' data, right? So there's even more anxiety around it. But one of the biggest debates I've seen play out in the executive boardrooms over the years is, let's have it on premise. It's going to be safer. I want my data here, right? And then you talk through all the things we've talked about. Well, maybe off-prem makes more sense, or a hybrid model. And so, truly, so much anxiety at the executive level. And I've worked with smaller companies who are spending millions and millions and millions on their data management infrastructure. So it's not a small decision. So I'm really curious, in your experience, what you're seeing, what you're thinking around that risk level, that security level in those two environments, either completely in the cloud, completely on-prem or on-premise, or sort of that hybrid model. What do you think they're worried about? Is it like a loss of control? Is it people, there's going to be a breach and we're going to all our customers' data is going to be compromised? What do you think the fear is?
There's multiple fears, I would say. You hear a lot of horror stories. You hear a lot of, the media is positively showing the kind of disaster that could happen, specifically in the small and medium-sized businesses. There's a lot of, C-level individuals which are a little nervous at the idea of actually moving to cloud. What they need to understand, though, is, if you look back into the last 20 years, you've really seen a major shift in the way business is being done. 10, 20 years ago, your organization was encouraged to invest into security on premise. You would literally write a check for, literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure that you have the latest security updates, you have the latest security workloads in on premise on your servers, which you have to pay for to maintain, by the way. And then you're just paying for the staff to actually maintain all of that. So you're basically building your own staff to become security experts. Okay, that's the model about 10 to 20 years ago. The problem is, as you probably know, it is expensive to run a security team, right? It is, unfortunately, recessions hit. It is an expensive endeavor. So what has happened is this notion of digital transformation that we've been hearing now for a few years. The last 5 to 10 years have really shifted towards having those security updates actually being in the cloud, being pushed directly to the endpoint. That is one of the reasons how digital transformation has been able to happen. And now we do still require security experts, but now at least all the security workloads are actually in the cloud. They're actually located not on premise. They're located at the cloud service provider location. And like I said, what I said before is now, with the billions of dollars that have been invested by the Microsofts and the Googles of this world, those data centers are more secure than the actual data center. I mean, you've probably seen there was an article about the CIA, who's basically signed a multi-billion-dollar contract with Microsoft, with AWS, with IBM, to outsource the integrality of their cloud directly by those guys. The reason is because these guys have deep pockets, and then they're the ones who basically understand and have all the resources, because the CIA no longer has the resources to actually maintain all of those themselves. So there's a massive shift that has been happening. So to those C-level individuals that are actually wondering whether it makes sense to move to the cloud, just because of that, just because of the shift of knowledge and means to actually maintain, it actually makes sense to move to the cloud, because the reality is your data center is never going to be able to be at par with what these CSPs, these cloud service providers actually are able to provide.
Let's take a quick break and hear from today's sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Vantry Systems. Vantry Systems provides strategic automation solutions delivered through human connection. And so when you're thinking about de-risking your EDI operations, you can count on us to get the job done. Contact us at www.vantry.com for more information. Now, back to the show.
Back in the day when it was just Microsoft, and then Amazon got into it, and then Google got into it, it was initially was like, I don't want to give all my data to one provider, right? And now there's so many. And to your point, for a CEO of, let's say, a medium to semi-large enterprise, they can't compete with the amount of investments that's been done into security, into infrastructure, into compliance. I mean, let's not forget compliance. That's Absolutely. A big one. Through all of that. So you mentioned, Rija, you mentioned cloud computing. The thing that, it doesn't even seem that long ago, like maybe 10 years ago or maybe a little more than 10 years ago, when I first heard big data, and I was doing some work with Hitachi Data Systems, and they were using big data as a phrase to talk about, let's say, data that's in the oil and gas, like seismic readings and whatnot. And you try and wrap your head around how much data is being taken in, let's say, at a drill site. Fast forward a decade. Data is growing, as you know. It's a ridiculous rate. We're past petabytes. We're onto words I can't even pronounce anymore, but how much data is being produced every day. And so, again, another reason that your data center just can't be completely on premise. There's no way you're going to be able to, handle all of that. That said, there are some shortcomings to cloud computing. And so I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that, and in particular, edge computing, right? So doing all that processing and all that data collection and all that security stuff right at the edge. Do you think that, do you think that's the future? Do you think that's just one of those things that's going to come and go? Or do you really think it's going to really help solve some of those problems that are, attached to cloud computing?
I do, Teresa. I do, because I think the reality is there's depends on the situation, but when an organization is trying to handle a workload, and that workload has some requirements. For instance, I'm going to give you an idea. The example that I talked about before, a workload like voice, for instance, like telephony, telephony or even video, what we're actually using right now. Some situations, some organizations actually have to be able to make sure that there's absolutely no issues happening during these real time in the way the data flows, to ensure that real time data like this, like video and voice, works. Because if there is a problem with this, if we have a problem with the way the data flows, we're gonna start having quality issues. So it could be problematic if you are into a call center and you were working for the police department, for instance, and if you're not able to hear the people correctly, or even if you are a media broadcasting organization and you're not able to provide good quality, all those kind of examples require real-time data to be handled. In those situations, I would recommend, edge computing makes sense. You need to be able to ensure quality of service. You need to be able to measure quality of service, and specifically in those situations where there's a matter of life and death. Because right now, for instance, we're talking about, and it's been a few years now, we're in the healthcare industry where you're going to operate someone remotely, and you're just going to use, you could do it remotely now. You want to make sure that you have the infrastructure that allows you to do everything you need to do, because it's a matter of life and death. So in this case, for edge computing, I would say, yes, it is. These are the areas where cloud will see probably some progress, and where there is a lot of progress to be made. Sure.
I think that's a great point. The life and death situations, but even I think of some of those really remote areas of the country, right, that don't have, let's say, the medical infrastructure, or just don't have that type of infrastructure, and they're doing so much of these consultations or surgeries in some cases remotely. It's at that point it's not just this paperwork and this abstract thing. Yeah. There's like people's lives on the line. It becomes very real.
But it is a possibility. We're very close, and it is going to shape the future.
Speaking of the future, Rija, on our podcast here, there's two main sort of subjects that we're interested in. Number one, automation, and I mean, we've been talking about it from the beginning of this episode about how it'll allow companies to scale, it'll allow companies to optimize, it'll allow companies to de-risk. For me, that's all under the umbrella of automation to a certain extent. But there is this very important human element that we're very interested in, Teresa and I, and even our company, Advantry Systems. And we'd like to get your opinion on, how these new technology trends are shaping our future, and specifically how you feel like they're going to influence the jobs of tomorrow.
I believe my belief is that the shift into this new economy has already started. It actually started already, from what I see, because I've been in this space for quite some time now. It really started probably in the last decade, where we've seen a tremendous acceleration of this transformation, this digital transformation. And unfortunately, situations like this pandemic has shown that some industries, some literally centuries-old industries, such as retail stores, or retail in general, what we'll call traditional retail, those tenets of the old economy are not able to survive in situations like this, right? So my sense is, if we want to be a fair society, we will need, you and I, everybody will need to think about how do we handle the changes that are actually being put forth by this transformation. Because the reality is, I think this transformation I won't be able to stop it. My kids won't be able to stop it. It is just a matter of going with it. And the jobs that we're going to create that will need to handle and accelerate it will have to be created, because it is something that we're going to have to handle at some point.
I think another great example of that is the real estate industry, right? If you think, maybe a decade and a half ago, you needed a real estate agent if you were buying or selling. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. The paperwork was too overwhelming. You had no idea what was listed. And if you bought a house or were selling a house, again, the legal work, the paperwork, etc. And then fast forward now, most of the people I know rarely use a real estate agent anymore. They go onto the MLS. They can see the inventory. They can, ultimately, they might be dealing with a real estate agent on the other side. Sometimes they're dealing with the owner. But this entire, to your point of, more jobs are going to be created, there's this entire cottage industry that cropped up right now. There's Grapevine. There's like a number of other real estate sites. There's also professionals who now make a living out of sort of being in that liaison, but at a far less percentage than the real estate agent. The real estate agent's getting a bum rap in some ways, because particularly in a hot market, let's say like Ottawa right now, you can you're selling a house way over asking price. And so usually in the same day or two, it's like same thing in Toronto, I know. And so your real estate agent is often walking away with tens of thousands of dollars. And you're going like, how much work did you actually do? And of course, behind the scenes, they're doing a lot. And so what real estate agents have had to do is, so number one, there's these cottage industry jobs that have cropped up that were never there before. And number two, real estate agents have had to reposition themselves, right? In their role in the sale of a house. It's no longer just about the transaction. It's about, the strategic counsel and the level of service and all that stuff. And so I think you're right about retail. I think the same thing's going to happen with movie theaters. The same thing's going to happen with commercial real estate. I'm sure you guys know a lot of people who are either going completely virtual or reducing their office footprint because they're going to have a hybrid model. And so there's going to be Class A, Class B space completely available. So I think there's a lot of industries that are digital transformation is, and the pandemic specifically, is going to shake up their model. And like anything else in life, those that can adapt and overcome are the ones that are going to be around. And those who are like, my business model just blew up, I got to go find something else to do, they're going to go find something else to do.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Teresa.
Yeah, one thing that I find interesting, with everything that's going on is, specifically touching on the jobs that are being created. Yes, there are jobs being lost. You mentioned a couple of industries that have taken a big hit, Teresa and Rija, but there's a lot of jobs available. I think people need to relook at what they are going to be educating themselves on. What is now the value of, going to these institutions like universities and colleges when you have companies like Google who are offering like development programs online, and just in a couple of months you can graduate as this developer for Google, and it could land you a pretty awesome job at Google. So I think yes, okay, there are a lot of jobs being lost, but I think there's a lot of jobs being created. And one thing that I'm positive about, based on what I'm seeing, is technology has allowed us to communicate and collaborate with each other, I think, more than ever. Yes, it's not physical, which can be a little bit underwhelming sometimes, but it doesn't allow you to connect with more people. Think of your reach that you can have when you're putting out a commercial video, for example, or contacting your family across the world, and being able to catch up for a special event. Like, I got married this year, and I essentially broadcasted my wedding across the entire world to all my family. So I think definitely there are some negatives, but I do definitely think that there are some positives out there, and people should try to embrace them, because like you said, Rija, this is not going backwards. We're going forwards. There's nothing we can do to stop it. So we have to embrace it. We have to look at the good side of things and kind of just move forward.
Yeah.
Anyways, Rija, this has been truly amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with Teresa and I. I wanted to give our audience the opportunity to learn more about Solulan and learn more about you and the Microsoft sort of data management space. So where can people get in touch with you, and what can you offer them?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Phil. People can obviously get in touch. We have a website, solulan.com, SOLULAN.com, where people can get our contact information. But I would say that really is because of this situation that we have today with the pandemic, where we can certainly add value to organizations, small, medium, or large organizations, really is to be able to help them continue to grow and thrive, specifically around security, because security is a major issue, and it is something that we do how to come up and provide some assistance on a strategic level.
Fantastic. Thank you again for the time you've taken out of your day to meet with us, Rija. And on behalf of Teresa and I, we'd love to have you back on the show one day.
Thanks,
you. Thanks, Rija.
We'll be happy.
Great chatting
we'll be happy
with you.
To come back for sure. Thanks again, guys.
You are listening to the New Level Podcast, where humans talk about automation. We bring you industry experts and share new ideas that help elevate your business. Join your hosts, Philip Agib and Teresa Foreman, on the journey of automation technology.